Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. This is The Briefing. On November 30th last year, OpenAI quietly released ChatGPT, a language model capable of human-like text interactions through generative AI. Microsoft raced to add it to Bing, Google tripped over its feet to launch Bard, Facebook and Apple announced $1 billion investment in their own generative AI, and Amazon fast-tracked Bedrock. Western media were equally breathless. Vox called ChatGPT stunning, and Wired said it would change the way we interact with the world. The Guardian warned it might be used to spread propaganda. The New York Times worried it might be used to manipulate. But in Southeast Asia, the news industry has been using generative AI for content generation, translation and localization, as well as other AI technologies for content recommendations, fact-checking and more at the Straits Times, Rappler and the Jakarta Post, to name a few. We polled 13 journalist fellows to ask if their news outlets were using generative AI technology. 63% said no. 37% said, I don't know what that is. For an SCA take on this AI bustle, this week we're turning to Splice Media's Rishad Patel, a seasoned product and design professional based in Singapore who writes a weekly newsletter on product development, Splice Frames. That's The Briefing. Let's begin.
So hello and welcome to another one of our global journalism seminars here at the Reuters Institute of Journalism. And no surprises, we are going down the AI path for good or evil. It's a packed house online, so welcome to everyone who's joined in for this conversation. It is going to be scintillating for many reasons, not least because Rishad is here to speak about AI and journalism, but also for two things that come to mind. One, the fact that I think this is one of the first conversations happening that is really exploring what's happening in the non-global north networks, not the large media organizations, not the ones that really pull a lot of heft, but the smaller, nimbler organizations and what they can do with AI and journalism. And second, to the fact that I hope Rishad and I can chat about, which is what does this mean for journalists per se? I don't mean the tips and tools that you're using, but what kind of stories should we be telling in a responsible fashion around AI to really build awareness for what is ultimately your key goal, informing your audience better. So Rishad, welcome. All introductions to your core skills have been done, but I may add another one, which is a funny story about how Rishad and I met, which is that we follow each other and we know of each other's work, but we finally got to meet in person at the media conference in Perugia. And the both of us spent the better part of 1 hour going up and down a street, trying to recognize who we were from very, very small thumbnail-sized images of each other, which kind of feels like the conversation around AI at this point, Rishad, where people are sort of scrambling to try and identify something they may not have, or no one does perhaps have a clear handle on, right?
I mean, I feel that that's a very good segue into this conversation. Yes, we knew each other from thumbnails, but then I resorted to the crowd, and so I put the word out.
Let me very popular shot, yes.
So it was the wisdom of the crowd that saved us, and I was like, well, put the word out. Do you know what Mithali Mukherjee looks like? Here's who I'm trying to find. And sure enough, I had enough people come to me and say, here she is. And then we met. And I think that's kind of where we're going to go with this chat about AI. Thanks for inviting me.
No, not at all. And I think in one of our previous chats, you sort of lined it out quite succinctly in terms of the mood, which is that it swings between hysteria versus nothing. Is there a snapshot even to define how AI and journalism are sort of engaging with each other at this point?
I feel like, yes, indeed, there is a massive amount of hysteria, and while we should have a sort of diplomatic nod towards it, I trust we're not going to go to either extreme. Either the hysterically excited and announcing the second coming of whatever it is this new technology brings, but also the fear-mongering that we see so much of. And that's the hysteria at the other end of the spectrum. Obviously, as we know, two big things have happened since, in fact, we last chatted about this, and since we agreed to do this talk. One is that OpenAI announced that ChatGPT can now read the internet. It can access the internet, which is, the big scary move towards real-time knowledge. And then the idea that there are now third-party plugins. And this now opens it up to different use cases, and a whole different area of access. There's obviously a whole bunch of applications that come from there. But I think the interesting thing when I polled a bunch of the folks that we work with at Splice, Splice helps people build viable media businesses. And so as a result, we work with a lot of media startups. We're interested in the journalism creators in Asia. We work with the media startups, mostly in Asia and around the world. And we work with a global ecosystem, media ecosystem, to make all of this happen. So of course, the nice thing that happened when I spoke to these folks in Mongolia and Nepal and all of that was, I like that people are currently, the good news, of course, here is that people are currently in experimentation mode. Nobody's making big bets on AI right now, at least not around content. I think that's good news. I think that people are not ready to operationalize this yet, at least among the folks that I spoke to. And that might be a good thing. So folks are using it around podcast show notes. There's a tentative use of all of this. How can I experiment with this around podcast show notes? How can I use it to summarize? So, the phalanx of tools that now allow you to summarize stuff, which have been around a long time. Social media illustrations, little posts, landing page introductions, and populating CRM tools for databases and stuff.
So I want to dive into all of this. One, the experimentation mode that you're seeing in some of these smaller Asian newsrooms. And two, if we can keep connecting the dots, saying, here's the experiment and here's the learning. Because I think as seems quite evident from the people you've spoken to and the people I've spoken to, there is a degree of nervousness about taking that leap. You're not sure if your pockets are deep enough to absorb any potential losses. You're not sure if you have a full handle on what the in point and the out point looks like for a small organization. And most importantly, you're not sure if you have the acumen to really steer through something that is completely new, new waters for everyone. I know that we discussed beforehand that we chat through some of the experiments. So happy to kick off with anything that you'd like to in terms of what you saw, what you liked about it, and what you think a learning could be for a smaller news outfit.
I think you're right about those three things. I'm going to add a fourth, if I may.
Yeah.
I think there's also a little bit of nervousness around credibility. I don't know how many reporters and journalists right now, and I could be wrong. I'm a product guy, I'm not a journalist, but I've worked closely with famous, I know, I can see a whole bunch of people dropping off right now. But what's a product guy doing here? But I think that there is a credibility risk with any kind of new technology, any kind of new tool or workflow, or editorial structure. And I think that perhaps it's, yes, I don't take it very seriously, and I think that is some of it. I mean, I'm going to use a quick case study from not the Global South, not Asia, but, Gazeta Wyborcza, this Polish newsletter, did this famously. The deputy editor has a cool quote that says, refusing to use generative AI is like not using search engines 30 years ago. So very much in the positive camp. So they started using ChatGPT to write articles a while ago in early April. One reporter, and he wrote a text called famously Elon Musk versus OpenAI, the race to create a new human computer interface. And it ran on their website, it ran with the reporter's byline, no explicit disclosure. And the goal of experiment was, of course, to find out if ChatGPT would be able to write a quality article in the style of the reporter. To everybody's relief, it turned out not to be the case. But I think that once in a while, we've all played around with that. I've tried to get it to write my newsletter. Full disclosure, it was, horrible Frankenstein's monster. I think that, so I think that there is that slight embarrassment, and I have a feeling that that's going to change. I'm happy to talk about some of the Asian media startups.
South examples that have worked. I know that you've looked at a few in India, for example, like Khabar and Scroll as well. What is it that you're working for those outfits?
Interesting. So Khabar Lahariya was one of the first that I asked, and this is, just to put it in context, an Indian newsroom for and by women in rural India, newsroom that we admire very much at Splice. And I asked them, and she said that they've been experimenting with ChatGPT for socials, which is a refrain I've heard through the research I've done through all of our folks, our community. Our designer has been using Midjourney and Dream for a couple of months now for social images experimentally, and that's it. They've backed away from using it operationally in the newsroom. What I really loved about Scroll on the other end was, and Scroll.in, of course, is a digital newsroom in India. I spoke to them quite extensively, and the person I spoke to said that they'd done they had a problem to solve, which was interesting, very specific problem, which was they did a lot of layoffs in 2019, especially around video stuff. And then they got funding to build a multilingual text-to-video tool. So that's a big one that they're working on. So that means a whole bunch of things. They're going to be able to rework and revitalize their 8-year-old archive of articles, 8-year-old archive of images. And then the working theory here is that, is generative AI going to be able to make short videos to feed that demand in India for short video, but around multiple languages?
Yeah. Let me pause before we jump to the next experiment and sort of summarize this and correct me if I'm wrong, which is that one good way to approach this is to start small, 2 or 3 projects. Don't be very ambitious. The other thing to do is get the right people in terms of this conversation of what you're trying to construct. And the third perhaps is to, as you pointed out with the example of Scroll, secure your data sources. Does that look like a good few stepping stones? Would you add some more?
Very much so. I think, yes, the only thing that I would add, and perhaps through the conversation, is that I think the huge, content is one tiny part of the conversation. I think the huge opportunity we have here with not just generative AI, but and not just generative AI for content, is to be able to look outwards from the newsroom and outwards from content and use this technology to make what we're doing, this journalism we're doing, either more relevant for our existing audiences or to be able to reach new audiences. The power of AI to currently, especially with these 2 new factors, and I'm happy to address that later on, the idea that this can access the internet, and so we're current and up to date, of course, with a whole bunch of factual errors, but also that there are third-party plugins that allow us to make our offerings in this day and age when so many media orgs are struggling to survive. It allows us to make our offerings reach the right people. And my big, we're in the business of seats at the table. We're in the business at Splice of making sure that journalists make money, to put it bluntly. Media organizations make money, and they diversify their sources of income and revenue. My big nightmare, we've done Splice for 8 years, is that what if you're doing the best journalism in your life and it's not getting to the people that need it most? So that's where I'm seeing the massive opportunity here.
Are there examples that come to mind that have been able to do this in some or a large degree?
Not just yet. I'm going to bring up my friends at the Nepali Times in Kathmandu, in Nepal, obviously. And this is a newsroom that's been around for ages, since I think the early 80s, but I need to fact check that. These folks, when I asked them, what are you doing? And they've been very much a print product. It's been very much a traditional, what we like to call legacy media. And what these folks have done straight up is to say that they were looking for new audiences by doing AI-generated Instagram videos, but from their existing stories. Now, the assumption there, of course, is that there are younger audiences on Instagram. That may or may not be true. They may or may not be interested in news, but I like the direction that that's taking.
Let me jump off that to make another point, and hear your thoughts in it, which is it essential for a news organization to identify the pain points they're trying to address when they're thinking of how to integrate AI, or should they just cast their net very wide and say, let's experiment here or there and see where we land?
I feel that that's a great question. Thank you for that. I feel that it's important to be able to cast wide, but also skim, shallow. Look at the areas where you can use this. I think I worry about sometimes a solution in search of a problem. And I don't know that AI, there's a lot of like, oh, you've got to use AI before AI uses you. And there has been some talk of that, or before it replaces you. I don't think there are very real problems out there to solve for our audiences. And I think that, to go back to the second part of what you were saying, yes, I think it is a huge opportunity to be able to use that content and use AI, and not just generative AI, to be able to explore where your products, how to get them to these audiences, how to solve problems for them. How do you, we have this superpower now available to us of being able to ask specific audiences what they need help with. So things like, how do I vote? How do I make sense of an election? How will you help me make this national budget relevant to my life? So can I use AI and all the tools that are at my disposal now to serve that audience? How do I do rent or mortgage? Do I move my kid to the school that's closer to home, or to the better school much further away, and ruin their chance to have, a life with their friends, etc.? There are real problems to be solved, and I think, for audiences. And I think that there's another problem, which is even within our journalistic circles and the conferences we all go to, for example, to use AI to make sure that our newsrooms, our references, our news gathering, our sources, experts, panels, and products are inclusive, diverse. Are they truly representative of the people that we serve?
Before we get to this very, very important point about audiences, Rishad, just one final sort of observation or comparison from you, if you will. Reuters recently sort of released a letter in terms of their approach to AI, and they said, we're very comfortable with autonomous content. It's something we've done before. So our approach is going to be skeptical and verify. Is there a marked difference that you see in the approach from large global organizations versus the more nimble-footed in terms of what AI is doing in their newsrooms? Or is there not a big difference? It's a scale that matters.
I find that, and if we're talking about the scale, of course, we can't help but bring up BuzzFeed and their AI-generated articles and the whole ridiculousness around that. But have we grown to expect this from BuzzFeed over the years? Perhaps. Do we take them seriously? Do we not? Is it AI or is it something else? But maybe edit that bit out. But I love that. I love Reuters' memo that they sent to their staff. I think that's at the grown-up end of the spectrum. That's at the non-hysterical, middle of that spectrum. And I love that that memo was about responsibility and transparency and, values of skepticism and verification right up front. I love that the scroll.in did exactly the same thing. And I have deep respect for anyone like that. I was told they were in the middle of drafting the use of AI policy, and that should be out soon. I'd love for that to be a standard that we could use collectively across newsrooms.
Let me pivot then to the point about what's happening with our audiences. And let me put 2 or 3 things in front of you. One, I think I heard you correctly when you said the Polish news outfit published that story with no explicit admission to the audience that they had done it. Second, your point about this being relevant for audiences and actually impacting their lives in a meaningful way, either by informing them better or by changing their lives. And the third, which was the recent OpenAI Senate hearing, which was not at all as sort of lively as a Facebook hearing might have been or a TikTok hearing might have been, where Altman actually called for regulation, but there were some other points which he made, such as, let me find that exact quote, the public would learn to adapt to an onslaught of AI-aided false information and media. Are we treating our audiences with enough respect and care when we're looking at AI from inside a newsroom?
I think the worry here is multifold. And I think that the concern here is that, yes, are we expecting people to be grown-ups and to be able to tell, whether the Pentagon was in fact bombed or whether it was just complete rubbish, as we now know? Are we,
Some of these channels from my land may disagree, Rishad. We had strategic experts describing what they saw, but hey.
So that's what I mean. Are we now, and we keep talking about that spectrum of hysteria, the hysteria spectrum. But I think that, yes, I'd love to, as a product and audience guy, my work is around how to make journalistic and media products relevant to audiences, existing audiences, but to be able to find new audiences to serve. I think there's also the tendency to treat an audience as though it was this monolithic single mass audience. And I think that we need to very quickly, it's been 2023, AI or no AI, we need to be able to move away from that idea of publish it and they will come. They want this. They don't want that. The number of times we've heard people in Myanmar won't pay for news. People in Poland won't pay for news. There is no one single audience. So yeah, is there an audience that will believe everything you say about AI and panic when you tell them to panic and trust when you tell them to trust? Yes, of course there is. But I think there are separate audiences who want to be able to understand this better. And as journalists and as media organizations, we're in this incredible position to be able to be that representative entity that makes sense of the world, to be able to be a whole different kind of gatekeeper, to change that old idea that we decide what's good for you. We're the fourth estate. We tell you what's democratic and what's not. So I think that there's this huge opportunity to be able to collaborate with audiences, to be able to go to them for once, and say, listen, we are creating all of this. What can we do for you? How do we make journalism that service industry that it was always meant to be?
You raised a very important point about credibility, Rishad, and I might add impartiality to that and trust to that. Are there examples, aside from building a policy towards AI, that come to mind where newsrooms have actively done that in an environment where it's AI or it's algorithms, where at some point the human being is saying, hey, hang on, can you read my mind? What's going on? I'm seeing exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think we have, of course, we've been suspicious around that. We have had that urban myth of, there I was talking about so and so, and suddenly I've got a follow ad, on my phone. I think again, it's going to happen. We've had that technology well before generative AI or this generation of AI made itself clear back in November. It's been around for ages. You search for something and Google wanted to sell you that. You did a little search for where to eat Korean food, and then you got Korean food ads for months on Facebook. I think that's always going to happen. I think the conversation around disinformation and misinformation is going to be freshly fueled now, I think, with this idea of AI is going to ruin our life. And it's the next coming of Satan, or whatever variation on that. But I think that I think it's possible to be hugely optimistic about the fact that this allows us, again, not speaking as a fanboy, but I love that the Current, for example, a Pakistani video newsroom run by one of our folks in our community called Mariam Chaudhry. I love that they're experimenting with video news, but in Urdu, and they're still working their way around that. But they're using it for how-to stories, and a lot of people are using it now for guides. So when you start populating, all your content surfaces with here's how you apply for your Pakistani passport renewal online, which is an example she gave me. How do you get your driver's license? Here's how you apply for a visa. How do you pay your taxes? This is now you're getting into an area where you can do this news reporting in a responsible way, and you can use technology that's available to you, but you're also building trust.
And there's two parts to it when you're looking at journalism, to my mind, Rishad. One, as you say, is how am I using this as a tool to the best possible advantage of my organization and my audience, hopefully. And the other, I think, is how am I telling this story as it develops? I mean, I don't want to draw comparisons, but we've sort of seen that with the crypto boom. There was suddenly all these journalists reporting on what was the next best thing after gold biscuits. This is crypto, this is everything. On a bad day, this is nothing. I'm not sure by the end of this entire journey how much audiences really felt informed about what was happening with this industry, what it was made of. What kind of stories should journalists be thinking about when they're talking about AI, in terms of what is the development, what is the context of this development, what does it mean for us really?
I have two interesting examples of that. And you're right about that. We were bombarded with crypto, we were bombarded with, nobody says Web3 anymore, or dares to say NFT any longer. We've been through that, and it's recent. This is all, literally 3 years. We had all of that. But what I loved is two little tiny case studies. One is The Fix, which is a little newsroom that I like to follow, a bunch of friends in Poland. They had a level-headed guide for journalists on how to cover AI. I like that they're using this. I like that that people are experimenting around benchmarks. And as with every kind of technology, including social media from all the way back then, we're going to have to find a way to make policy around it, how to make money around it, how to find values, how to write style guides. How do we use this? How do we tax it? And I think that I like that, you know, the average article around, the fix says, the average article around ChatGPT has tended towards dystopic CEO-centric hysteria or gushy determinism. How do we counter this? How do we write about the dangers of AI, but not from an ideological or emotional standpoint, but from technical elements? How do we make our audiences comfortable with this? How do we share that language? Likewise, Casey Newton of the Platform and Newsletter fame, I loved his recent experiment. He asked his readers, and you know, in my book, that's awesome. Talk to your audiences more about this, and he asked them, how do you think I should cover AI? And they told him, and it was a beautiful list. It sounds like a user's guide to how to think about AI. Be rigorous with your definitions, predict less, explain more. Don't hype things up. Focus on the people building AI systems and the people affected by it. Offer strategic takes, not emotional takes on products. Emphasize the trade-offs involved, which is exciting. So be balanced and nuanced, and tell us which trade-offs make sense for us and tell us which don't. And then finally, remember that nothing is inevitable.
The term I like is level-headed guide. I'm going to appropriate it and attach it to everything that I communicate with. I had a bunch of questions about policy as well, but I can see questions pouring in, Rishad, so I'm not going to hog all my time, all your time here. There's one that's come in on LinkedIn where Akrit Michael asks, Rishad, how do you estimate AI will reshape and is already disrupting news SEO?
Oh, right. Absolutely. And this is an exciting thing. We're moving from now SEO to citations. And the interesting thing there is obviously, you know, you have, this is devastating for publishers, obviously. You know, you now can't necessarily depend on your traffic coming from, you know, it used always to be links and social and search, which is where you got your advertising and your audiences. I think that there is now a whole different idea around what we should do about this. And I think, again, being the eternal optimist around media, I think there's three things we can do. And I think one of those is diversify formats. So it comes back to what your formats are. Publishers will need to productize around audio, around video, events, and direct delivery vehicles like email. I love that every time we talk about programmatic, you know, AI-driven, algorithm-driven media, we tend to come back with every generation of technology to the oldest tech around, which is email delivery. And this explains the rise in newsletters, right? Then your web pages are now no longer going to be able to be, you know, cluttered, you know, pages that we're used to. You have to go, you plow your way through display ads, autoplay videos. Please sign up for my newsletter, register here, subscribe there, let me give you desktop notifications. We're going to have to do away with all that and make sure there's more dynamic content that's updated. And then personalize the experience is the third point I'd make around that. When we have this opportunity to be able to personalize, it's fantastic. So static content bad, generative AI, but personalized and altruistic, might I add. So not creepy personalization. Hey, Rishad, nice shirt. You know, is not what you want to hear when you're taking a walk down. But the idea is to sometimes do things that don't scale. at Splice, we do things that don't scale, which is we write to every single person that signs up for our newsletters. And we're proud of that. It's a lot of work, but it's a few seconds, and we'll write and we say, hey, Dali, thanks for signing up. Where do you work? And what do you do? And, love to meet for a coffee, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what Alan did when I signed up for your newsletter.
There you go.
Yes, exactly. I want to hop across to our own conference room where our global journalist fellows have lots of questions, but I just want to quickly slide in one, Rishad, about cost. All these hot takes that we're getting from ChatGPT, for instance, are cool because they're free. What should newsrooms have in mind in terms of how much this whole thing is going to cost them? That's where, as a product guy, as you know, it ultimately does settle very often.
I think there's hard truths involved there, and I think there's actually relief involved there. I'm not in a position to make predictions. But I think that some of the costs are, involve people actually being the best kind of gatekeepers to be able to fact check hallucinations from AI, which we know that it is prone to do. I think that we will need a whole bunch of folks around that to be able to incorporate that into not just our tools and workflows, but into our editorial policies. I think that's hugely important, and that's a cost. I think that there is also the opportunity to be able to share that cost with audiences again. And by audiences, I mean, do you have a B2B audience for what your newsroom puts out in terms of, say, reports? Not the atom of news is not necessarily the article. The atom of news can now be diversified into multiple atoms for multiple audiences. You can, why do a story on a budget that is a picture of two dudes in suits shaking hands with 4 legs of copy and a headline, when you could make me, the user, understand that budget way easier with a calculator? Why not publish a calculator? AI makes that super easy to do. Why not have AI crawl your stories as a matter of workflow in your CMS with a plugin that says your gender balance is really off here? Why do you not have more female sources? Why do you not have more variance in terms of religion, in terms of representation of all kinds? So I think that cost, as with all tech, will become cheaper over time. And I think that content has to keep pace with that.
Okay. Let me hop across to that room now. I think Yossi is waiting by with the question. Yossi.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today. You were discussing already earlier how well newsrooms are taking their audience into account in their usage of AI. And I would like to circle back to that theme a little bit, but from a perspective of when something goes wrong. For example, when false information gets published as a part of coverage where AI has been used. And I'm interested in how well you think newsrooms are equipped to explain their audiences what went wrong and owning their mistakes when those happen. Is there enough tech evidence to be accountable of AI usage?
Thanks, Yossi. And it's a slightly scratchy line. So Rishad, if you want me to repeat any of that, just say the word.
Yes, I had a little trouble understanding the line is a little scratchy. But how do we get newsrooms to own their mistakes when there has been, say, a hallucination or a complete re-rendering of facts? Is that roughly where your question is?
Yossi, if I may just take the liberty to read out what you've written because we can't hear you clearly. You were discussing, which is you, Rishad, how well newsrooms are taking their audience into account in their usage of AI. Yossi is interested in a situation where something goes wrong with coverage, where AI has been used, for example, and false information gets published. How well are newsrooms then equipped to explain to their audience what went wrong and owning their mistakes when they make those mistakes, is there enough tech savviness to be accountable in terms of AI usage?
I think there's two possible answers there. One is that you have a very clear policy, and this is why AI usage policy is so important. The way Reuters did it and the way Scroll.in is doing it. I think that policy involves a two-pronged approach. One is taking ownership of the mistakes that you've made predates AI by hundreds of years. Should you take ownership? Yes, you should. That has nothing to do with AI. Would you be able to use AI ultimately to be able to catch the mistakes that AI makes, or the reporting, fact-checking mistakes that journalists make? Sure. Why not? Why should you not? And I think the other, so those are the two use cases that I would see, is that you have a very clear policy. What do we do when this happens in the newsroom? That is very much shared in the workflow and in the principles of the newsroom as an important part of the editorial process. And how do you actually fact check, which to my mind has very little to do with AI. Fact checking and apologizing for those mistakes and making them right is a responsibility that I assume journalists have by default.
Another question that's coming online, Rishad, from Mariam Jabeen. I don't know if it's the same person you were talking about earlier in terms of her work.
No, that was Mariam Chaudhry. Yeah.
How media organizations are coping with, and I'm sort of just summarizing what she's written, building a basic level of journalism literacy around the subject, especially when the audiences that you're reaching out to, as you said, are not this sort of singular block where literacy levels and awareness levels might be quite varied, especially perhaps in some of the global south countries that we're talking about.
Yes, we've worked with a whole bunch of folks in audiences in India, in Nepal, and in of course in Pakistan, and it was exciting. We worked with an organization called LokSajjarg in Pakistan. Perhaps you guys know them, and we helped them prototype a product around radio, and which is one, audio is of course one interesting way to be able to deal with problems around literacy. The beautiful thing that they were able to do is have this, they created this radio show, and it was in Punjabi, in Pakistani Punjabi. And the idea was that you're talking about getting it not just to wider audiences. I'm reading Mariam's question now.
Yeah.
When they're not used to digital media or the internet at large. In situations like that, it doesn't matter. Their audience testing was done around a large shady tree in the middle of villages. They played their radio show and they got super specific feedback around, we don't like the female host. Your music is too loud. They go on and on. There's too many opinions. We need more facts. And we'd like more, we'd like different format sizes. So make a short show, but also do an option for a evening, longer show in the evening. As far as I'm concerned, that is a news product done by a news organization with an audience. I don't care if it's digital or not. It doesn't make a difference whether the literacy is up or down technically. Is that something we can address with AI? I'd love to think so. And I love that Mariam ends her question where you're saying your research revolves around media literacy, including AI and crisis literacy. So I'm very excited, that we have someone like you doing this work, and I'd love to know more.
Let me hop back to the room and hopefully there's better audio. Otherwise, I will step in as interpreter again. Felipe, you have a question.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. And as you mentioned, SEO will be impacted in the coming years with the integration of AI in the search engines. And generative AI also relies on news articles to generate responses. Should the companies developing AI interface be required to compensate for the content they are using?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and that goes back to the code in, you know, the recent news code in Canada and in Australia. My answer for, you know, my short answer is I don't know. I think, as we know, we're still trying to create policy around technologies over the years. We're still catching up with social media, which have been around for arguably, you know, 2 decades. You know, we haven't figured out how to tax it, how to, you know, where its boundaries are, what its geopolitical footprint is, whether it has any. These things are bigger than countries and economies. We're getting there. I think that the simple answer there is that in order to generate something, you have to feed the machine. And I think here we are. We're in the business of feeding the machine that we also use. And I think at some point, we're going to have to figure out how this works together. That's all I have. I wish I knew more.
Tarje has a question as well. Tarje, go ahead.
I'm Tarje from Norway. As you said, many media organizations are developing AI policies. I'm curious which ones are, in your opinion, the best ones that we can learn from so far? And also, is there a need that media organizations come together and develop more common practices on these policies?
I love this. So, you know, one of the things that we do a lot of, and thank you so much for that. So yes, a resounding yes. Is there a need to come together and create a policy? Not just, now we've seen, you know, just here, we've seen 2 policies at work, and those are the only ones that I know about. But we've seen the Reuters policy, and we've seen the scroll.in policy, which they're talking about. Should we come together and draft a policy, not just media organization by media organization, but perhaps is there a way to talk about this and draft this as something that will singularly help us all, a sort of AP style guide, as you would. And one of the things that I asked Sanuta Raghu of scroll.in was, and I hope, you know, she doesn't mind, is that I was so excited by the fact that they're drafting this policy. I said, you know, I think the community needs to learn from this, number one. Number two, we have, you know, we do a media startup festival every year in Chiang Mai in November. And could you come and teach us how to write a use of AI policy? And she was like, wait, really? And I said, yeah, we desperately need this. And I think that that would be one of the most well-attended sessions at our festival. I would love ways to be able to collaborate on this, perhaps using AI to draft a use of AI policy. So, hey, send me ideas. I'll make it happen.
Can I be devil's advocate though, Rishad, and ask?
Yes, please.
As you said, with Reuters, it's sort of the grown-up end of the response and the policy and the take on AI. Can we expect an entire community that is going to be using this to be the most responsible about their own accountability to the use of this? I'm just asking.
You know, I think that's inevitable. I think that, you know, unofficially, we're going to have the subreddits, we're going to have the splinter groups, we're going to have the watchdogs. I think that's going to happen, right? But I think that much like, you know, we make these 3 assumptions, right, in the journalistic world. we must use generative AI before it uses us. There's this thing that we've got to do it. I'm not entirely sure why. Abdulaziz Khatak has a comment on the chat here where he says, as a journalist in a small media organization where manpower is an issue, but content cannot be compromised on, I find AI as a God-sent thing. It could help us reduce our stress levels and do our jobs better and faster. Well said, Mr.
My friend,
Khatak.
that's the industry. Your stress levels are not going to change.
I completely agree. But and the second is, of course, that again, that the only thing that generative AI can generate is content. It's not true. So I love this idea of how do we talk about policing? How do we talk about the mean? Where do we get that central benchmarking to happen? Is there an opportunity for an independent body to actually do this? I also liked Altman's take on it. When he spoke about this, he was kind of circumspect. There were warnings. He said that he welcomed regulation of the emerging technology, and I think as one of the people that made this entire conversation and this possible across the world, that is an awesome thing to be saying. He also welcomed regulation of the technology, which is spectacular. You don't often see a guy who has brought startups out of nowhere and proliferated them around the world, saying that very often. So I think, and he also said, he drew parallels with Photoshop. I'm not sure that was necessary, and I don't know if it's apples to apples, but he said when Photoshop came on the scene about, 30 years ago, people were fooled by Photoshop images. We would get hysterical to overuse that word, but we developed an understanding around that, became part of our common plumbing and our common vocabulary. And he said this will be like that, but on steroids.
Everything is better on steroids, is it not? 7
Yikes.
to go, and I'm conscious of time, and I can see more questions. So let me squeeze in as many as possible. Hideki, our fellow who is visiting from Japan, has a question for you. Hideki, go ahead.
Hi, Hideki.
Thank you for speaking here. My question about impartiality. Can AI be used to make journalism more impartial, or to make it seem more impartial to polarize the audience?
So are you asking whether AI can be used for impartiality?
To make journalism more impartial, I think is Hideki's question.
So I think, again, it's nature, nurture, and tech, right? I wonder, right? So I wonder if this is also a principle, is it not? It's a human principle. Should an editorial policy in a newsroom must decide what impartiality means, and it must have buy-in from that newsroom. It is part of a style guide, but more than a style guide, it's also part of your journalistic ethics and how you spread that around your practice of journalism. So I also think that may or may not have anything to do with AI. Can AI be deployed in order to crawl through a story and figure out how partial or impartial it is? Perhaps. I think it's entirely possible. I bet you there's a plugin out there right now. Likewise, can you deploy AI to crawl through a story and say this is completely skewed towards men? You don't have enough women sources. Your conference program, your fancy conference program, has way too many people talking about AI. Chill out a bit, and maybe you should talk about audiences a little bit. Stuff like that. So sure, can the technology be used and deployed to to make this a more partial world, for sure. Can I do a quick, Mithali, if I may, a quick shout out to, I had a couple of participants who may or may not be online, but I had a newsletter update, two newsletter signups yesterday because of this session. And I had a guy from Spry Labs in Berlin. Hello, Peter, if you're there. And I asked him what he did, and he said they're building the AI-powered publishing platform. And this is interesting. It's a SaaS solution for medium-sized news and magazine publishers. And I'm encouraged when I hear him, read the rest of his email to me, which is there's an editorial CMS, there's a experience thing to build custom apps and stuff and websites. But what I loved was there's also a bunch of tools geared towards newsroom efficiency and audience development. Another sign up from the Danish School of Media and Journalism, hello, Peder, who also may be on this. They're working on a research project that around how AI can be introduced in the education of new journalists. Now that's amazing. That's where you can feed this around impartiality. You feed the machine with impartiality. You feed it with an education around what an ethical editorial policy looks like and how to serve readers. I think there's huge hope out there.
Which brings me to my final question, Rishad, which is how do people reach out to the Splice gang? How do people collaborate with the Splice gang? Don't go by Rishad's Twitter image. I can assure you that's not an accurate way to find Rishad at a conference or anywhere else. So what's a good way to hear more about Splice and collaborate with you guys?
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. We go to splicemedia.com. I'm happy to pop that into the chat or if that helps. Come to Splice Beta, subscribe to our newsletters, and meet our community. Come to planetsplice.com. We have a little Slack community of global media wisdom and kindness. So come on in. There's no AI at work there.
Say so. Thank you very much, Rishad. It's been really excellent chatting with you. My apologies. I know there was a stream of questions. I tried to sort of make space for as much as I could. 1 hour was clearly short time and not enough. So find Rishad where he pointed you to, and you can lay out all your questions over there. It's been really great chatting with you. Thanks for making time for this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This was so much fun.
Likewise. And for our audiences, we'll see you again next week.